I was like, man, I've been wanting to learn about Ash, and this wasn't the excuse I needed. So I definitely am not super authoritative here. Like if you put in, 20, 30 hours on this, you'll know way more about it than I. So my goal here is maybe to like teach you a little bit about it and sell you on it. I'm going to do a great sales job, and hopefully you walk away thinking, yeah, I want to buy this free open source framework. But I will call out too, I didn't actually know what John was going to be presenting on, but it's amazing how well our talks work together, because ultimately, like, Ash to me is like a different tactic to execute on John's strategy. So like you could kind of contrast the approach of using Ash versus using just Phoenix and Phoenix Live View. And I don't know, it'd be an interesting, like maybe one day we should have like a battle and see how quickly you can, using the two approaches.
I'd love to.
But ultimately, yeah, like, I think that both of our talks are really exploring this like spectrum with lazy / rapid. Where's the line between being, it's true that the fastest code is the code you don't write and all that jazz. So before I jump into that, yeah, so what am I going to cover? I'll just tell you a little bit about myself and about 7shifts. 7shifts is not relevant other than the fact that I feel like anytime I give a talk on Elixir, I need to talk a little bit about how we use Elixir, just for some context. But I'm going to spend most of the time talking about Ash and what it is and why it's awesome, and how it's different than other things that probably seem very similar on the surface. And then I'm going to talk about a real world example of something we quickly threw together, using it and kind of similar, explore like what are the tactics one employs in order to quickly throw stuff together. Real quick background on myself. Yeah, that's me. I'm Galea. That is my battle station. And I am CTO at 7shifts, leading a department of about 115 people, 115 developers here. And previous to that, I worked with Mattia over at Precision Nutrition. And I won't go through all of it, but a long and hard of it is that really my native tongues are kind of Ruby and Elixir, and I love databases. So I'm a Postgres aficionado. In terms of real quickly, what does 7shifts do? We do restaurant team management. So scheduling would be like the simplest side of it, but it's really like hiring, onboarding, training, paying, scheduling, retaining, all of that jazz. So we've scheduled over 225 million shifts in North America, and our mission is to simplify team management and improve performance for restaurants. And I promise I'm not going to sell you on it all, but the context here is basically our apps are things that restaurant employees use in order to do things like trade shifts or to do tip pooling and get paid out on their tips at the end of a shift and all that kind of jazz. And our stack does have Elixir in it, but I just need to give the caveat that the vast majority of it is PHP. So effectively, we're a PHP monolith, like a tamed monolith, like Shopify style modular monolith, and with a bunch of different front ends on it: Android, iOS. We have a public API and a React SPA. And then on the side, we have some macro services like a Node.js service for file storage. And then we use Elixir for all of our like real-time WebSocket stuff, because PHP is terrible at that. So that's the long and short of it. So the caveat here is the vast majority of our work is not in Elixir, but I love Elixir, so I'm always looking for opportunities to use it. And I will also call it that this is our headquarters in Saskatoon. This is a satellite office here. We are in Toronto. Again, not relevant to the talk, but I just thought since you're here at 7shifts, I got to tell you a little bit about us. And that is the end of the sales job about, let me sell you on Ash now instead of 7shifts. Okay, so here we go. So Ash is this framework whose kind of like claim is that it is for building powerful and composable applications with a flexible tool chain. And the big call out here is the tagline of model your domain and derive the rest. And it was created primarily by this guy, Zach Daniel, who is funded entirely by Alembic, which is a consulting company, as best I understand. So I don't know the details, but my suspicion is that they effectively use this framework for a very similar, like quick delivery for customers kind of loop, as like John described. And so what does that look like for reals? Is like, this is a resource, which is the central, first-class citizen in Ash. It's really, when they say model your domain, they mean you're modeling the resources and the relationships to each other. And so if you look at this as like an example post, it has a bunch of attributes. it has a bunch of actions, and it has a bunch of relationships, and poof, we're done. It's like the end of my talk. No, but at its base, really, you've got this DSL that allows you, totally independent of how the data is going to be used, what the API looks like, how it's going to be persisted. You're just like, these are my entities, and here's how they relate to each other, and these are the properties of each one, right? So Ash resources are kind of like the core that you define. And then the magic is all the cool shit you get for free, right? And again, I don't want this to be like a me versus John approach, tactics approach, but like in contrast, you've got your like code generators dumping out code everywhere. And then with Ash, the idea is that you have this DSL for describing the resources. And then there's all these bits that derive value and function from that metadata. So database persistence is something that you just choose how I want to persist it. And there's everything in the resource descriptions for the framework to derive how it gets persisted, to the point where it generates all your migrations for you and runs the migrations for you and handles like validations and all the rest of it, right? It gives you an Elixir API that you can use, like they call it a code API, but you know, for Elixir. It gives you tight integration with Phoenix and a bunch of cool stuff to make it easier to build Phoenix, whether live view or not, applications on top of it. It gives you an auto-generated admin so that you don't have to build bullshit if you don't care how it looks. It gives you a GraphQL API and a JSON API, and it was only released in August, so there's probably more coming soon. And I like all that stuff because I'm super lazy or busy or however you want to look at it. And so, you know, like John, I like to get the most done with the least effort quickly. And this appeals to me in a way that, as much as I know it's possible with Phoenix, like this just jives with the way my brain works more. And I hope to sell you on it as well. Because there's other free stuff you get. I know this sounds super salesy. I have absolutely no vested interest in anyone using Ash. But you get like a ton of free stuff, right? You get pagination, filtering, sorting, calculations and aggregations. You get pub sub for real-time change notifications, authorization policies, API specs, and an admin UI, all for free with no code generation. I don't know, it's magic, right? So how does it do all that? So the magic here, basically like the high level model, is the idea that you have this kind of core Ash that really does nothing on its own. Like if you install the Ash framework, you're going to get to design some resources and model them, connect them to each other, and then you don't have an application. Like you wouldn't be able to, you know, query, everything would just be stored in memory, if that. And then there's all these different things that add on, and the way they work effectively is, like I said, they derive function from the metadata. So JSON API, you can kind of go, well, there's probably enough in the relationships between all the resources and the attributes and the validations for us to figure out like what a JSON API schema should look like, all the rest of it. But there's obviously going to be bits that are maybe unique to this particular derivation of the resource. And so it also, every add-on has the opportunity to extend the DSL to further enrich the metadata in the resource. So what that actually looks like for like a real world example here is you've got your like use Ash resource in the post, and then you specify all the extensions that you want. In this case, I'm saying Ash JSON API. And then now I have a new DSL thing, JSON API, that lets me say all the stuff that would not be relevant to a resource in the absence of the JSON API. Like, you know, what is the type and what are the routes and all the rest of it. Is this kind of making sense? This kind of model of like the give and take. It's like I'm going to drive a bunch of stuff, but there's probably things I need that are not there. So I'm going to add a little bit to the DSL and then use that in order to make it richer. Okay, so obviously, like you've probably encountered things that sound like this, right? Like just to name a few, there's Hasura, there's PostGraphile. You could argue that Firebase is kind of like this. So, you know, what's the deal, right? One I'll call out is that in all of these cases, they're like, throw your database on the internet. They're not like, okay, let's come up with this abstract representation of my problem domain and how it works. They're like, okay, wouldn't it be great if we could define a relational database schema and somehow have that magically turn into a JSON API? And the consequence there is, one, you could argue that SQL is a domain-specific language for defining relational databases, not for defining resources and their actions and all the rest of it. And the other side of it is the way you extend it. If you need to do something outside of the defaults, in the case of Hasura and PostGraphile, you basically are building another app and registering webhooks and telling it to call that app whenever you need to do custom actions. So it's basically like, oh, I've solved all my problems by just pushing them forward to tomorrow. And then now I have to still build like, and then likewise, like Firebase makes you do the same with Cloud Functions. So you're like, I literally have to deploy, like, depending on how you think of Cloud Functions, you're effectively deploying an entire application because you need a bit of custom functionality for a single action. So this just makes me feel gross, like it couples the application directly to the database. It's not extensible within the runtime, whatever within the runtime means in the context of the modern cloud world, right? And so ultimately, it's like, I know this is my own aesthetics coming forth, but I just think this is gross. Like, I want to move fast. I get if you're planning on just throwing everything out, then fine. But I think what Ash and what this model of modeling your problem domain and deriving from it gives you is a way to potentially not throw everything away, because what's stopping you from just continuing to extend here. This, I don't think, anyway, I'm sure that there's somebody here who's had a great time taking Hasura and making it work at scale. And I love databases, and I bet I would really enjoy it. I just don't think I'd be able to get like a large team to all love writing stored procedures every time they want to do anything that isn't the default. So let's just accept that we're not doing it that way. We like it this way, it's better. So yeah, this is me just illustrating what Hasura and Firebase and all these guys look like, is like this. It's just like database, blah, GraphQL, and then some other app serving REST endpoints for custom actions. Again, I have not put the time in order to have a really informed opinion on how amazing Hasura is. I just aesthetically, I don't like it. And, somebody should do a counter talk at some point to tell me how great it is. But like in contrast, what does custom actions look like in Ash? One is you kind of have this DSL that allows you to say, well, I'm going to create a custom create action called open. That, when you open something, it needs a name and it automatically sets the status to open. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can do just by messing around with the DSL. But chances are, like if you need to do something really custom, you effectively just say manual blah, and you define a module that's responsible for the custom action, and you implement it in Elixir, which means that you can do really anything, and you always have this like escape clause, and ultimately, there's probably some philosophy you document here in terms of like at what point do you write a custom action, but maybe the second time you extend a DSL, and so that you don't need to do it or however. But ultimately, there's a way of doing it, and it's on you to, use the power responsibly. But it's there. Okay. So I'm going to walk through some of the other magic and explain how it works. So databases, right? You want to be able to persist. In the absence of database persistence, I'm actually going to walk you through the whole like Phoenix to database setup. So assuming you wanted to do, like John described, rapid app development, and we'll talk about GraphQL and all the rest of it later. So at a high level, there's Ash Postgres is a separate extension, it's a separate hex package and all that jazz. And it lets you specify a data layer. There's all different data layers. There's like amnesia and ETS, and there's like a default to simple, which just is in memory. There's CSV. Like if you wanted, you could just store everything in CSVs. Or if you have like, I don't know, like a table with all the countries, like, yeah, maybe just throw a CSV somewhere and then have that be your data layer. And then it extends the DSL for a resource and adds this like Postgres stuff, which allows you to do things like customize what table it's actually stored in, and all the rest of it, right? And then it provides an Ecto-like interface. So I don't know, I don't want to spend too much time like going over line by line, but the gist is it should look and feel a lot like using Ecto. It's kind of meant to be a more or less drop-in replacement. And then in your Phoenix app repo, you just change use ecto.repo to use ash postgres.repo. And so now Phoenix is wired up to Postgres through Ash. And so effectively, for all intents and purposes, you're interacting with the resources. I'm okay in the dark, I guess. Okay, and then so at this point now, we've basically like taken our classic like Postgres Phoenix setup, we've inserted Ash in between. Now we have like effectively like nothing's really defined other than the resources, and it magically works. And then there's Ash Phoenix, which gives you a whole bunch of form and live view helpers that are smart, as in they're Ash aware, if you will. So like the Ash resource stuff contains a whole bunch of information that would not be present otherwise, right? Like descriptions for every field, descriptions for the resource, you know, you have validations defined in there. And all of that means that you can effectively say like, give me an Ash Phoenix form for this resource, or give me like there's a utility for keeping a query result up to date in a live view. So you can basically be like, give me all the, I don't know, people in Toronto in my database, and then have it automatically kept up to date using PubSub is, you know, like one line, right? Because there's already a helper for it, and PubSub is part of the framework, and yada, 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 yada. So I'm glossing over a lot of details. Like there's obviously config and stuff behind the scenes, but this is the high level, right? Okay. We've got database persistence. Let's talk Ash admin. So same deal. Ash admin, you add an extension, which now gives you admin do blah within your repo, which in practice would let you customize what the auto-generated admin looks like, or control who has access to it, or whatever you want, or maybe don't even bother. Like I haven't found the need to customize admin much, because as soon as I'm not happy with the auto-generated admin, I'm not using the auto-generated admin. But and then what it ends up looking like is like you've seen a million ugly looking auto-gen admin. It looks like that. It's like, you know, it allows you to read and write and do all the actions, and it automatically infers what's possible from, yeah, it's magic, right? Okay, so there's a ton of other cool stuff, which I did not have time to make slides for, so I'll just tell you about them to try and like whet your beak. There's flows, which is the idea that you can kind of have a multi-step process, kind of similar to, well, the Elixir flow library, where you can kind of specify, you know, multi-stage, these things in parallel, these things in series, yada, yada, yada. And so if there's a complex process like a purchase flow or something like that in your app, you can actually specify all the steps, put them together into a flow, have that custom action kick it off, and then it'll actually generate mermaid diagrams for you. So you get like code docs right out of it, of your resource definitions. You can have external resources. So like maybe don't bother calling Stripe, or well, Stripe is a bad example because of PCI compliance, but what I'm trying to say is you can wrap an external resource such that it's transparent to everything outside, right? You're exposing an API, and the fact that maybe that's another system, or it's calling a third party, is totally hidden from the caller. Does multi-tenancy. So if you decided that you wanted to have like Postgres schema multi-tenancy, where every one of your customers gets a derived schema from a parent, that's one line, and you're just like, yeah, I'm doing multi-tenancy now. And the framework, because the concept of resources is independent of tenancy, it's more or less trivial to go from a single tenant system to a multi-tenant system. You've got authorization policies, you've got other data layers. I don't know, there's tons of magic, right? Okay. And now real quickly, why did I even do this? Like, what, you know, where did I feel that this fits? I think that really anything John described in his talk is probably a classic case. In my case, I came across a Hacker News post a week ago that was kind of like calling out, why are there no open source applicant tracking systems? And I was like, geez, they're right, there really aren't. And I've had my share of frustrations with all of the applicant tracking systems that I've used. And it really is, you either just like buy a big commercial system and then are unhappy with it, or you just are too small to care and you don't have one, basically. And I think the general consensus, I hit all the comments, but the general consensus was that nobody would be willing to work on HR software unless they were being paid. And so that's why there's no open source ATS software. And I was like, geez, you know, like one of our engineering principles at Seven Shifts is to give back, to find some, you know, ways to share our time, learning and resources to improve each other and elevate the industry and help make the world better and all that jazz. And I felt like, you know, there has to be a way for like, I get that nobody's going to work on HR software for free because it's not exciting and fun and all the rest of it. Sure, let's take that as a granted. What can we do? Can we make it so fast, so easy that they don't care that like that you know, maybe the trick here is to just reduce the investment required to get to something usable, to the point where even though no one loves working on HR software, they would. And that was kind of my thinking. But to go even further, kind of like, again, to kind of piggyback on John's philosophy, I think that sometimes, assuming you know your tools really well, and you've got a really good flow for how do I quickly, rapidly develop this, the biggest problem is how do I learn this problem domain? Like, learning an ERP is going to take you, like, the domain of ERP is going to take you like 4,000 hours just to get to the point where you're like, I feel like I know enough about this domain to write the first line of code. And similarly, like HR and applicant tracking systems are, you know, like there's been a lot of time and effort put on this, and I could spend like months or years and not even get to the point of catching up with the state of the art, right? So how do I avoid even modeling the domain? And here, there's actually something called HR Open Standards, which is a global HR data vocabulary developed by ADP and a bunch of other people, which is basically like all of the stuff for HR described as resources and their relationships to each other. And it sounded like, I was like, shit, it sounds like they're describing the perfect case for me to just build an entire HR system with it basically not even understanding the domain. By pumping this crazy schema. This is only the ATS schema. Like there's 400 data model of like resources and their relationships, and they cover like recruitment, interviewing, screening, compensation, job descriptions, requirements, certifications, and that was all I cared about for ATS. There's like all the other areas of HR that we didn't, you know, get into, everything from like wellness to, you know, all that kind of jazz. So I thought, man, I could probably like make the definitive open source ATS in like 3 hours. You know, all I need to do is get all of this craziness into Ash resource descriptions, deploy it, and then I'll just like chuck a match behind me and walk out, and you know, we're done. So in practice, what I found during the quick hackathon was that there's so many edge cases to trying to go from a massive complex JSON schema to code or from an XML schema, that I didn't have time to actually like deal with every weird edge case and every strange use of some kind of, you know, bit of JSON schema that I've never seen before that the library doesn't support. So I ended up hand coding the core bits just by like looking at the description and hand coding it so I wouldn't get stuck. So candidate, person, position opening, and position profile were the core models that relate to the idea of basically a job posting and, you know, what are the requirements for the job and all that kind of jazz. So as you might imagine, it's like a position opening, it's got some attributes, it's got some relationships. Yeah, we're good. And you can see how that would be very easy if you had more than a few hours to just derive from the big schema, right? So the long and short of it is, yeah, that is like the end of my slides. But I will call out, if you want to check out Open ATS, as I called it in its current form, the link is there. It's public on GitHub, and it is deployed to fly.io, which took a whole 5-10 minutes on top of the rest of the time. So that was a nice, quick and easy way to get it up and running. The admin's there, the JSON API is there. You can go to, you know, /JSON API ATS schema, and it will give you the auto-generated JSON schema. So all that to say, that's Ash, and I hope you will consider it next time you are feeling very lazy and want to move fast.
Okay, questions. I'm also going to pull the chat online, but any questions from here?
John?
No, let's take a fight.
I have two.
Mm-hmm.
First one is there an escape hatch where you can just go and write regular Elixir and Phoenix and LiveView code?
Oh, definitely. So first of all, like your Phoenix and your LiveView code is regular. You don't have, like, the only way in which it's weird is if you choose to use these helpers on the front end. So if you wanted to just like do a little bit of extra heavy lifting because of the fact that the built-in helpers aren't going to be aware of Ash resource like extra metadata, then you just go for it. And likewise, on the other end, if you do need to just like write totally custom queries against the database, there are ways of kind of like implementing. Yeah, so the long and short of it is, yes, there are escape hatches.
I think this slide answers my question, but this is written in Elixir. It's an Elixir library, yeah?
Yeah, it's all pure Elixir. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Technically, there's another library I didn't mention, but I'll just kind of call it out. This magic of kind of like extending the DSL and driving is actually a separate library called Spark, which is basically just like a library around DSL, management, if you will. So, but yeah, it's all pure Elixir.
No way, I could probably get it down to 20 hours with this.
I think you could. I think you could. And this is very new, so you shouldn't be kicking yourself at like, this was like, oh man, I want to, like I think the like full release version only came out at the end of August.
Yeah.
So you're on the ground floor.
I
Right
have a
here.
question from the chat.
Yeah.
How does it handle iteration? If you add, remove fields to your models, add more constraints, etc.
Yeah, so there's a mixed task that looks at the short answer is it diffs, right? So if I were to go into the resources and I would like remove or rename a column or whatever, there's a mixed task you run and it notes the difference and generates a migration in order to update the database, and then you're good.
I have a question too.
Sure, go for it. Yeah.
Persistence. You said you can use different persistence frameworks.
Yeah.
For different resources.
Every resource can define its own.
So how does it do relationships across resources?
That's a good question. If you were yeah, that's a good question. You mean if you're trying to do a join across two different, like, I can't imagine that would work.
Yeah.
I have not tried. I've not tried. Yeah. I would expect it not to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question about you had a comment there when you're talking about Ash and Min. You're like, the moment I have to do something custom, I'm not gonna trust it. I'm just gonna do it myself. Probably, like you were saying, to extend in mind, just do Elixir. Does that come from experience writing custom admins, and have you been bitten in the past from that? Like at my current company, we're sort of bitten by the ownership of some custom admin stuff. And like the Rails upgrades for us are quite easy coming to Ruby world, but the admin side never is easy because like the framework designer it doesn't have many maintainers. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's a good call out too. Like there's so many of these admin frameworks that are poorly maintained. My thinking is more along the lines.
If you catch on, right? This is say you can't be ready your entire app.
Yeah, exactly. The reason why I kind of called out that I probably wouldn't like get stuck on the treadmill of customizing the auto generated min is, well, one, this entire framework is kind of designed to make it like really easy for you to build stuff quickly in Phoenix or GraphQL and React or whatever you want in front. And I think the value of the admin comes from just going like, oh, well, I don't need to build an admin for this yet. Let's just quickly, like, just to give you a real world example, this open ATS, we like, maybe you can have a user facing UI for, 1/10 of all the models you've built, or the resources rather. And I guess the long and short of it is, I think that as soon as you start trying to make the auto-generated min look like something that you're proud of and get in front of customers, you've actually crossed over into the line of like, use the tools that are there. I think it's really like a scaffold that involves no code generation that lets you quickly move on with your app and know that probably someday you'll have replaced all of the admin, would be my, if I was to zip on over here to like, this open ATS that we threw up. Oh, geez. This one. So like here we use the Phoenix, like this is standard login, whatever. I don't know, mess around with it. There's pub sub. So if you like post a job as one person, everyone instantly sees it and all the rest of it. But the admin, effectively, it's like each of the APIs goes across the top, and then you get like all of the different resources for each one. So if I go to like person and then read people, I get all of my, it's like super, super simple. It's probably enough for your basically like admin or customer support or what have you. And then as soon as you actually like care about how it looks, how hard would it be to do this in Phoenix Live View when you don't have to write anything other than the view, right? So anyway, that's kind of my thing.
That's very sort of-
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I feel like I had a similar question for John when you were up there gonna ask. In order to iterate on the code generation side, did you find yourself writing scripts instead of load all the way and start from scratch? Because it's almost like we were leaning on LiveView for the iteration process. We've got another iteration process in front that like pre-generated, whereas this one is kind of sort of gives you that built into Ash. You're committed to Ash because you're reloading, iterating on your resource generation.
I think that's a good way to look at it. Like, I mean, I do think that, you know, Ash and the idea of kind of deriving at runtime, all of it means that, yeah, I mean, I don't know, we're getting into a little bit of like aesthetics. Like, I know that there's reasons to like code generation, there's reasons to not, you know, I think.
The database schemas are same, right?
What's that, sorry?
The database schemas are same.
Oh, yeah.
Like the person, there's a person state.
Yes,
There's not some crazy 17 level deep abstraction.
no. The database tables look like what you would
Like
expect.
reasonably what you would write.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's a question in the chat, I don't know if you know this, but for GraphQL,
Mhm.
do you use Absync API?
It's built, it uses Absent, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Bruce, I think you heard us. And so, yeah.
It's built on top of Absent for sure.
Okay.
You mentioned tenancy
Mhm.
and, I've done a few tenant accounts which are challenging. So that's an attraction. Can you like build a standalone app and then go, actually, you know what, I want this to be tenanted, and then.
That's exactly it. There's actually, the data storage layer has the concept of tenancy built into it across like all of the backends. And then there's the concept of a tenancy strategy. And so different, like the Ash Postgres extension provides the Postgres schema inheritance multi-tenancy strategy, which is, I'm sure we all know, the best. No, but it is the like. But no, but honestly, I like that form of multi-tenancy where you have like a database schema and you derive a child schema for each tenant, and that's what's built in out of the box. And then potentially, if you had to work with a crappy database like MySQL, you might need to implement a, like, I don't know, there's a column in the front of every table that, you know, my shitty MySQL equivalent version. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
This is I mean, at the beginning, it's like you take a standalone app and you can make it tenanted. That's like.
yeah, it's magic. Yeah, I've been super impressed with this framework. Now, obviously, like I haven't tried to build out a huge enterprise app with it yet, but I feel like after messing around with it this much, I feel pretty confident that the problems I encounter would be less than if I didn't use Ash and had to deal with them all another way.
And
Yeah.
how does testing fit in? Because like your testing is on the
So
Phoenix Elixir layer?
So one is like you should write, like it does not magically write tests for you. Obviously, like the framework itself is tested. But the long and short of it is that it doesn't do any kind of magic deriving tests or anything like that. So if you're, as you write your app, you should write tests for your Phoenix LiveView stuff or however you're doing it. Yeah. Any other questions?
I
Oh.
have another two.
Yeah.
Does it lay on top of Ecto as well for persistence?
It does. It does lay on top of Ecto, but it is not, I wouldn't say it's a leaky abstraction, like it kind of hides Ecto. Like when you're doing your queries, you're not using raw Ecto queries, you're using kind of like an Ash query kind of deal. It's pretty like familiar, but it is a little different than, yeah. It basically maps from the Ash queries to the Ecto queries behind the scenes.
Did you turn on Amnesia or ETS at any point?
I did not, but it's on my list.
Okay.
So, yeah. I imagine it works.
I imagine.
Yeah.
I still want to find a good Amnesia or ETS Ecto adapter to play with.
Yeah. I mean, you know what, if I try it out, I'll let you know. And, because yeah, I think Amnesia could be really cool in this case for a lot of,
Have you written a PHP interpreter in this one?
I have no, right, no, but I did kind of have an idea like you could even have it use the external custom action and just like fork out to PHP right there, right? So it's like maybe I could like have bits of PHP hidden behind external resources and nobody even know that they are. So no, I'm working on it. I'm thinking about it. I actually, there's this new project called Franken PHP, which is it's a Go implementation of a runtime for like, it kind of wraps a PHP runtime, and anyway, I'm gonna see if I can do a Franken PHP port to Elixir, and then I'd be able to throw PHP resources into Ash, and that would be the evil master plan.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.